For decades, we've been told a simple story about the Prequel Trilogy in Star Wars. The Jedi were the heroes, a noble order of guardians defending the galaxy, and the Sith were the villains, a shadowy cabal plotting their downfall. The Jedi's fall, we're told, was a tragic consequence of an elaborate conspiracy. But what if that's a grand deception? What if the true horror of Star Wars isn't the evil of a single man like Palpatine, but the systemic ideological rot of the very organization meant to protect the galaxy? What if the Jedi Council, in their blind arrogance and dogmatic hypocrisy, were the true villains of their own story? This isn't a story of good versus evil. It's a Greek tragedy of an institution so convinced of its own righteousness that it couldn't see the seeds of its own destruction that it had so carefully planted. Chapter 1. The Illusion of Order. The Jedi Council is presented in the rich tapestry of the Star Wars universe, projects an image of absolute order and infallible wisdom. They are the wise old wizards sitting in a pristine temple on Coruscant, a golden spire rising far above the teeming masses and the criminal underworld below. This physical separation is a perfect metaphor for their spiritual and ideological disconnect. They were an organization that had become so insulated from the messy realities of the people. They claimed to serve that they lost all sense of perspective. Their perceived order was a thin veneer, an illusion maintained by thousands of years of unchallenged power and a rigid, unyielding code that had ossified into a form of dogma. This illusion of order was their gravest weakness. The Jedi had become a part of the very system they were meant to watch over. Their presence in the Galactic Senate as the chief military and diplomatic force of the Republic was a profound and fatal entanglement. They willingly traded their spiritual purpose for political power, becoming an extension of the corrupt bureaucratic machine. This is a far more insidious form of villainy than a maniacal supervillain. It's the horror of realizing that the heroes themselves, in their pursuit of stability, had become the very thing that was holding the galaxy back from true peace. The Republic, as detailed in various narratives, was a morass of political infighting, trade disputes, and corporate greed. The Jedi, rather than acting as independent guardians, were drawn into this mire, forced to compromise their principles to serve the Senate's will. They became powerful bureaucrats with lightsabers, and their fall was an inevitable consequence of an institution that had become complacent and corrupt. The Jedi weren't defeated. They'd committed a slow bureaucratic suicide, and the galaxy paid the price for their hubris. The Jedi Order's journey from a spiritual peacekeeping force to an arm of the state was a long and tragic one. For millennia, they had served the Republic, but this service eventually led them to lose their way. Their role evolved from being detached arbiters of justice to being the primary enforcers of the Senate's will. This change blurred the lines of their purpose, forcing them to make compromises that would have been unthinkable to their predecessors. They became embroiled in political disputes, and their lightsabers, once symbols of peace, were now used to protect the interests of a government that was rotting from within. Their presence on the Jedi Council was a constant reminder of their political power, not their spiritual wisdom. They were so deeply embedded in the Republic's failing bureaucracy that they became an extension of it, losing their spiritual purpose and becoming nothing more than powerful functionaries with lightsabers. Insidious erosion of their core values made them easy targets for the Sith. Palpatine didn't need to conquer the Jedi with brute force. He only needed to exploit their existing flaws. He didn't have to force them to fight a war. He simply had to start one and let their pride and their loyalty to the Republic do the rest. The Jedi Council, in their profound arrogance, believed they could fight this war and remain spiritually pure. They were tragically mistaken. The war forced them to compromise their principles again and again, leading to the creation of a cloned army, a profound moral contradiction for a peacekeeping order. They were so busy fighting a war on the chessboard designed by Palpatine that they couldn't see the true threat. They were so concerned with the Senate's approval and maintaining their public image that they couldn't see the rot at the heart of their own organization. Their villainy was born of a profound disconnect from the Force they served and the people they claimed to protect. The Jedi Council's greatest flaw was arguably their complacency. For thousands of years, the Jedi had been the unchallenged power in the galaxy, the final word on matters of the Force. This long period of peace and stability bred a profound sense of self-righteousness. They believed that because their order had endured for so long, their way was the only way. This left them completely incapable of adapting to new threats or new ideas. Their rigid code, which once served a purpose, had now become a cage, a dogmatic prison that prevented them from seeing the truth. They were so convinced that the Sith were extinct that they couldn't comprehend the possibility of a new Sith Lord operating in plain sight. They were so confident in their own wisdom that they couldn't conceive of a young, arrogant Jedi like Skywalker being more than just a tool for their own purpose. This complacency led to their bureaucratic suicide. The Jedi didn't fall. In a glorious battle, they were dismantled from within. Palpatine didn't need to defeat them in a fair fight. He simply had to use their own rules and their own systems against them. He turned their own army against them. He exploited their blind loyalty to the Republic, and he used their own rigid code to create the perfect conditions for a powerful Jedi to fall. The Jedi Council, in their hubris and their complacency, were their own greatest enemies. Their fall was a tragic, yet inevitable, consequence of an organization that was too rigid, too proud, and too blind to see the truth. They were not victims of a conspiracy. They were co-conspirators in their own demise, and their fall left the galaxy to pay the price for their profound ideological decay. Chapter 2. The Horror of Prophecy. The Jedi's obsession with the Chosen One prophecy was a catastrophic misinterpretation of a powerful but ambiguous Force vision. They believed the prophecy foretold an individual who would bring balance to the Force by destroying the Sith. This led them to a desperate attempt to control their own destiny rather than simply letting the Force guide them. This fear-driven interpretation turned the prophecy from a comforting notion into a cosmic curse for Anakin Skywalker. They saw his immense power as a sign of his destiny, but instead of nurturing him as an individual, they treated him as a means to an end. This single-minded focus on the prophecy blinded them to the child's true needs. They disregarded their own rules to train him even after Master Yoda expressed deep reservations and Qui-Gon Jinn's ghost warned them. Their decision wasn't an act of faith. It was an act of a frightened institution trying to manipulate a Force they no longer truly understood. The Council's horror here lies in their systemic coldness. They didn't see Anakin as a person with emotions, attachments, and trauma. They saw him as a powerful asset, a piece on the chessboard of the Force. They tore him from his mother, a brutal act that created the very emotional void that Palpatine would later exploit. Anakin's immense suffering and loneliness detailed. In various comics and novels were ignored because the Jedi Code demanded he suppress such feelings. They forbade him from forming healthy attachments, creating an environment where his love for Padme and his mother became sources of shame and fear. This rigid emotional repression created an emotionally unstable individual, a ticking time bomb waiting to be set off. The Council's constant scrutiny, their endless suspicion, and their refusal to grant him the rank of master were all psychological tortures that pushed him closer to the dark side. They believed they were guiding him, but in reality, they were psychologically molding him into the very monster they feared he would become. This is the true horror of the Jedi's villainy, a clinical, unemotional cruelty that masquerades as wisdom. They were so focused on the grand cosmic plan of the Force that they forgot about the individual suffering right in front of them. The tragedy of Anakin's fall wasn't a failure of his own will. It was a testament to the Jedi Council's complete and utter failure as spiritual guides. They were so obsessed with the prophecy of the Chosen One that they became the very agents of his destruction. They didn't just fail Anakin. They actively created the conditions for his fall. Chapter 3, The Indoctrination of Youth. The Jedi Council's villainy is nowhere more apparent than in their flawed system of training and indoctrination. The Jedi Code, which they so fiercely upheld, wasn't a path to enlightenment. It was a psychological torture chamber that produced emotionally stunted and traumatized individuals. Children were taken from their families at a young age and raised in a rigid monastic environment where their every emotional instinct was considered a potential path to the dark side. The Jedi Order's training methods were a profound act of systemic cruelty disguised as spiritual guidance. The Code demanded a complete suppression of emotion and a severance of all personal attachments, a policy that in reality amounted to psychological abuse. Younglings taken from their families before they could even form lasting bonds were indoctrinated into a culture where feelings of love, fear, and grief were treated as dangerous weaknesses. This created an environment where a child's most fundamental emotions were seen as a threat to their own spiritual purity. Instead of teaching young Jedi how to healthily process their emotions, the Council taught them to repress them, creating a ticking time bomb of emotional instability, just waiting to be set off. This trauma extends far beyond a single individual. The history of the Jedi Order is riddled with tragic figures who fell or suffered because of this upbringing. Anakin Skywalker, a child with immense love and loyalty, was told that his feelings were dangerous and wrong. His grief for his mother was treated as a spiritual failing, and his love for Padme became a source of shame and fear. This emotional repression, as detailed in various narratives, led to an internal conflict that Palpatine expertly exploited. Anakin's fall wasn't a failure of his own will. It was a testament to the Jedi Council's complete and utter failure as spiritual guides. The Jedi Temple was not a haven of peace. It was a gilded cage, a prison for the human heart. It was a place where Jedi were isolated from the realities they were sworn to protect, leaving them unprepared for the emotional complexities of the real world. The Council's greatest act of villainy wasn't a single act of destruction. It was the slow, insidious erosion of the human spirit. They took the most powerful and gifted children in the galaxy and systematically broke them, all under the guise of training them. Their rigid code created a culture of moral absolutism, where any deviation from the prescribed path was a step toward the dark side. They were so afraid of the dark side that they saw it everywhere, even in the purest emotions. This fear This moral absolutism was what made them so vulnerable. The council members, in their pristine robes and on their high pedestals, were the wardens, utterly blind to the suffering they were inflicting. They were so caught up in the abstract ideal of the Jedi that they lost sight of the real breathing people in front of them. Their villainy was not a conscious choice, but a systemic generational evil that was far more insidious and destructive than any single act of the Sith. Chapter 4: Political Blindness and Moral Cowardice. The Jedi Council's villainy wasn't just ideological, it was also profoundly political. The Council's decision to act as generals and commanders in the Clone Wars was a moment of profound moral cowardice and a fatal error in judgment. They were a spiritual order, not a military one, yet they willingly became the faces of a brutal galactic-scale conflict. Their presence at the front lines legitimized a war that was in reality a masterful manipulation by the very man who sought to destroy them. The Council's biggest mistake was not fighting a war, but fighting a war that they were destined to lose because they were fighting on the terms of their enemy. They were a hammer in the hands of a hidden master, smashing themselves against a wall of their own making. This is a far more insidious form of evil than a cackling villain. This is the moral compromise of an institution that has lost its way. The Council's entanglement in the politics of the Republic made them blind to the Sith's machinations. They were so busy fighting a war on a chessboard designed by Palpatine that they couldn't see the true threat. They were so concerned with the Senate's approval and maintaining their public image that they couldn't see the rot at the heart of their own organization. Their villainy was born of a profound disconnect from the force they served and the people they claimed to protect. They became a military-industrial complex, a part of the very machine that was destroying the galaxy, and their fall was the tragic, inevitable result of their own moral cowardice. They didn't fall to the Sith, they fell to themselves. A council that was not just powerful, but profoundly out of touch. They were so insulated by their own power and prestige that they couldn't comprehend the true nature of the evil they were facing. Their hubris was their undoing, and their moral cowardice was the final nail in their coffin. The Council's moral failings extended to their treatment of those who challenged them. The infamous trial of Ahsoka Tano is the perfect example. When she was framed for a terrorist act, the Council, in a moment of utter political cowardice, chose to expel her from the Order and hand her over to the Republic. They chose to protect their own political standing and reputation over defending the truth and one of their own. They were so afraid of public opinion and political pressure that they were willing to sacrifice an innocent child. This is a far more insidious form of evil than a cackling villain. This is the moral compromise of an institution that has lost its way. When the Council later asked her to return, it was not out of genuine remorse, but out of a desperate need to save face. Ahsoka's refusal was a powerful condemnation of the Council's hypocrisy and their profound moral decay. The greatest horror of all in the Star Wars universe isn't a single monster, a single weapon, or a single villain. It's the inescapable, unending cycle of violence and suffering. The entire saga is built on this foundation. The Jedi fight the Sith fall, the Jedi rise, and then the whole thing starts over again. The galaxy never truly finds peace. The Republic gives way to the Empire, which gives way to the New Republic, which gives way to the First Order. Every victory is just a temporary reprieve, a brief moment of quiet before the next storm. This is the true horror of Star Wars. the feeling of a universe that is trapped in a loop, a place where hope is not a promise, but a cruel joke. The hero's struggles are not a path to a better future, but a desperate attempt to delay the inevitable. The galaxy is a cosmic prison, and the Force is the warden, ensuring that the inmates never truly escape. The final scenes of the saga, where Rey looks out at the twin suns of Tatooine, are not a moment of peace, but a moment of profound sadness. She is not a new hero. She is a new victim, a new pawn in the Force's cruel game. She has been given a new name, but she is still a part of the same old cycle of violence and suffering. This is the horror of the inevitable. The realization that no matter how hard you fight, you can never truly win. The galaxy is a place where history repeats itself, and the heroes are just the last ones left standing, a final tragic act in a play that will never end. This is a horror that is both cosmic and deeply personal, a terrifying truth that is woven into the very fabric of the universe. The heroes of Star Wars are not fighting for a happy ending. They are fighting to delay a tragic one. Chapter 5. The Hypocrisy of the Jedi Code. The Jedi Council's villainy is rooted in their profound and devastating hypocrisy. The Jedi Code, for all its talk of peace and justice, was a shield for their own cowardice and a tool for their control. They preached a philosophy of selflessness and compassion, yet they hoarded power and acted with immense arrogance. The Legends continuity gives us countless examples of this moral rot. They constantly mistrusted Anakin, but they had no problem sending him on dangerous missions and using his immense power for their own ends. They forbade attachments, yet they formed powerful, unquestioning bonds with each other, a kind of tribal loyalty that blinded them to the truth. They claimed to be guardians of peace, yet they became generals in a brutal war, leading an army of cloned slaves, a profound moral contradiction that they never fully acknowledged. The Council's greatest hypocrisy was their moral absolutism. They saw the galaxy in black and white, light and dark, and anyone who fell outside their narrow definition was a threat. This rigid worldview made them incapable of seeing the nuance of the Force, a failure that directly led to their downfall. They could not comprehend that a Jedi could have attachments and still be a hero, or that a powerful warrior like Anakin could be a force for good. They were so afraid of the dark side that they saw it everywhere, even in the pure love of a child for his mother. This fear, this moral absolutism, was what made them so vulnerable. They were so caught up in their own self-righteousness that they couldn't see the truth right in front of them. The Legends novel Shatterpoint, for instance, explores Mace, Windu's deep-seated conflict between his Jedi ideals and the brutal realities of war, a conflict that highlights the moral rot at the heart of the Jedi Order. They were a broken system, and their rigid code was nothing more than a band-aid on a gaping wound. Their hypocrisy is what truly makes them the villains of this story. They were not evil in the way of the Sith. They were evil in a far more insidious way. They were a corrupt institution that used a noble-sounding code to justify their own failures and their own cruelty. They were an organization that believed itself to be perfect even as it was crumbling from within. They were the architects of their own destruction, and their fall was a tragic, inevitable consequence of their own moral rot. They were not victims of the Sith. They were co-conspirators in their own demise. The Jedi Council's villainy is not found in a single evil act, but in the slow grinding process of moral decay that turned a once noble order into a shadow of its former self. Their rigid ideology and their profound hypocrisy are what ultimately led to the fall of the Republic and the rise of the Empire, leaving a legacy of pain and suffering that would last for decades. Chapter 6: The Tragic Fall and Legacy of Flaw. When we re-examine the Prequel Trilogy, we no longer see a simple story of good versus evil. We see a far more tragic and chilling narrative. The Jedi Council, for all their power and wisdom, were the real villains. Their downfall wasn't a heroic sacrifice. It was a tragic, inevitable consequence of their own profound flaws. They were an organization that was too rigid, too arrogant, and too blind to see the truth. They were so caught up in their own dogma that they became a tool for their own destruction. Their villainy was not one of malicious intent, but of systemic failure and ideological blindness, a far more insidious and haunting form of evil. The Jedi Council's legacy is not one of triumph, but of profound failure. They left a galaxy that was more broken, more corrupt, and more vulnerable than ever before. Their fall led to the rise of a new Jedi Order, an order that had to learn from the mistakes of the past and build a new, more compassionate, and more flexible philosophy. The tragic journey of Luke Skywalker and his students is a testament to the fact that the old ways were broken beyond repair. Luke's Jedi Order embraced attachments, family, and a more nuanced understanding of the Force, all lessons learned from the failures of the past. The Legends continuity proves that the Jedi Council didn't just lose a war. They lost their way. And in doing so, they left a legacy of pain and suffering that would last for decades to come, culminating in the devastating Yuuzhan Vong War. Their fall was not a moment of tragedy. It was a moment of inevitability. So when you watch Star Wars again, will you see the heroes or will you see the villains? Will you see the Jedi Council as noble guardians or as the architects of their own destruction? The true horror of Star Wars. Legends is not in the Sith, but in the Jedi themselves. A tragic, flawed, and ultimately doomed institution that in its pursuit of order created the very chaos it was sworn to prevent. The galaxy's greatest tragedy wasn't the fall of Anakin Skywalker. It was the slow, systemic decay of the Jedi Council, a decay that was hidden in plain sight and one that we've been conditioned to ignore. Thanks for watching.